The call that ruined my life came from a hospital I had never visited. I was halfway through a stack of compliance files when St. Matthew Medical Center appeared on my phone. I answered before the second ring because that was the kind of person I had always been. If a number looked official, if a relative might need something, if there was even a small chance a problem could become worse while I ignored it, I picked up. My cousin Sophie had been in a highway crash. Her parents were overseas. The hospital could not reach them. Sophie was unconscious, badly injured, and the leg that had taken the worst of the impact was deteriorating faster than the surgeons liked. I left work without finishing the review I was responsible for. I barely remembered the drive. I remembered the emergency department lights, though. I remembered the surgeon sitting across from me and explaining choices no 27-year-old cousin should have had to carry. They could attempt a complicated limb salvage course. It might work, it might not. It would mean more surgery, more uncertainty, and a larger chance of serious complications. Or they could amputate sooner, control the immediate danger, and give Sophie a clearer path to survival. The medical team leaned toward the second option. I called Uncle Mark until my battery was nearly dead. I called Aunt Helen. I called their hotel, their travel company, another relative who knew the itinerary. Nothing. The hospital had old emergency paperwork showing I could participate in urgent decisions if Sophie was incapacitated and her parents were unreachable. I had signed forms for her before, insurance forms, campus medical releases, the little pieces of adulthood Mark and Helen preferred to outsource to me because I understood paperwork and lived nearby. That night, the little pieces became a signature that changed a life. I signed. Sophie survived. When she woke, she asked where her leg was, then she asked who had signed. I will never forget the way her face changed when the nurse said my name. You took my leg. I told her what the surgeons had explained. She screamed over me. Mark and Helen came home furious and grieving. At first they asked questions. Then questions became accusations. Why had I not waited longer? Why had I trusted the surgeons so quickly? Why had I chosen the permanent option? Why had I believed I had the right? No one asked why they had left their daughter with a cousin as the local emergency contact. No one remembered that I had called until my hands shook. No one wanted the medical record once the simpler story became available. Claire signed the paper. Claire chose the amputation. Claire ruined Sophie. I spent years trying to repay a debt that had never been mine. I fought insurance appeals. I researched prosthetic clinics. I drove Sophie to rehabilitation appointments when Helen was tired. I paid bills they said they would repay. I helped Sophie edit grant applications when she decided to become a disability content creator. Then she discovered that pain drew an audience. Her video was called "The Relative Who Took My Leg Away." She did not use my full name at first. She did not need to. People found me. My employer received complaints. My social accounts filled with messages calling me a butcher, a monster, a woman who should never work near healthcare. Mark told reporters that he only wanted me to admit I made the wrong choice. Helen cried on camera and said a parent should have been allowed to decide. Sophie accepted every piece of help I still gave her and told millions of strangers that I had destroyed her future. One of those strangers decided apology was not enough. Megan Lewis waited in my company parking garage after work. She had followed Sophie's channel for years. She shouted that somebody had to make me understand what I had done. I tried to get away. She followed. There was a struggle near the vehicle lane. A horn, brakes, metal, concrete. I woke in another hospital. I died there too. Days later, the last thing I saw on my phone was Sophie's statement. She had never asked anyone to hurt me, she wrote. She had only wanted accountability. Accountability. Everyone in that family loved that word when the account belonged to me. Then I opened my eyes again. My office ceiling was above me. A half-finished compliance report sat on my screen. On the whiteboard outside the conference room was the same audit schedule I remembered abandoning years ago. Sophie had not crashed yet. My phone lay beside my keyboard. This time, I did not wait for the hospital to call. Before I entered the restricted meeting area, I turned the phone off completely and placed it in my locker. Then I closed the door. Chapter 1. My own work. Had forgotten how quiet the conference room could be when nobody was dying in my family. That sounds cruel. It was also true. The external review team occupied one side of the long table. Our hospital group's legal counsel sat near the screen. My manager, Denise, had a folder open in front of her, and the expression she wore whenever she expected somebody to ask a question designed to make us look careless. I knew this day. In my previous life, I had left before the difficult part. Sophie crashed. The hospital called. I told Denise I had a family emergency. Rachel, my closest colleague, took my files and tried to present sections she had not prepared. She did her best. The review still exposed gaps in our documentation. Months later, when a senior risk position opened, leadership chose someone else. No one punished me for leaving. That was almost worse. People simply stopped seeing me as the person who stayed steady when things became difficult. I had blamed bad timing. Now I knew better. I had made a choice. This time I stayed. Claire, Denise said. I looked up. The reviewer had asked about a cluster of incomplete patient authorization records from one of our outpatient sites. I knew the answer. More importantly, I had the supporting file. I explained the failure, the correction, and the new verification process without trying to pretend the original mistake had never happened. The lead reviewer asked 2 follow-up questions. I answered both. Rachel slid a note toward me. Nice save. I almost laughed. In another life. She had been doing this alone while I ran through a hospital corridor with my purse still open. The meeting continued. My private phone stayed powered off in the locker outside. The rule existed because some of the records under discussion included confidential patient information and active internal investigations. Most people complied without thinking about it. I had ignored the rule before. Whenever my family might call, Mark could need help with insurance, Helen could need me to read a lab report, Sophie could have lost her wallet again. There was always a reason to remain reachable. Being reachable had become my personality. When the review finally broke for lunch, I did not retrieve the phone. I ate a sandwich in the staff conference area and listened to Rachel complain about her landlord's new parking policy. "You're weirdly calm today," she said. "Am I usually dramatic?" "No, usually you look like you're listening for a fire alarm only you can hear." That hit closer than she knew. I took another bite. "Maybe I got tired of fires." She shrugged. "Good, they're noisy." We went back in. The afternoon portion was harder. A reviewer challenged our response to a previous adverse event report. Denise began to answer, then stopped and looked at me. I knew the timeline. I had built it. I laid out the dates, the interviews, the policy revision, and the training follow-up. I did not over-explain. I did not apologize for things that were not mine. I did not leave the room because somewhere across the city Sophie was probably already in surgery or being stabilized or being transferred between teams. The thought entered my mind and stayed there. I did not have to fight it. I cared that she was hurt. Caring did not require me to disappear from my own life. When the review ended, the lead assessor shook Denise's hand. "Your team was prepared." Denise glanced at me. "They were." The words landed in a place that had been empty for years. I waited until everyone had left the restricted area before I opened my locker. My phone felt heavier than it should have. I powered it on. The screen filled. Missed calls from St. Matthew Medical Center. Missed calls from Mark. Missed calls from Helen. 2 from a family friend. 3 voice messages. A text from Mark. "Call me immediately. Sophie was in an accident." Another. "We need you." My hand did not shake. That surprised me. I listened to the hospital message first. It was brief and professional. They had tried to reach me as an emergency contact. Sophie's parents had since been located. If I had relevant medical or insurance information, I could return the call. Her parents had been located. The system had worked. Without me, I sat on the bench in front of the locker. For years I had believed the entire family machine would stop if I took my hands off it. It had not stopped. It had simply forced the correct people to move. I opened Mark's messages. The last one read, "Doctors want us to make a decision about her leg. Call now." I typed slowly, "I'm sorry Sophie was injured. Please follow the medical team's recommendations." His reply appeared almost at once. "That's not enough." I looked at the words, then I put my phone in my bag and walked back to my desk. For once, not enough was enough for me. Chapter 2. Their daughter. Mark called before I reached the parking lot. I answered because my workday was finished. That distinction mattered to me even if he would never understand it. "Claire, where have you been?" No hello, no Sophie was hurt, only "where have you been?" As if I were late for a shift I had agreed to work. "At work. We have been trying to reach you for hours." My phone was off during a restricted review. Sophie could lose her leg. I stopped beside my car. The parking garage smelled like hot concrete and exhaust. In my last life, a different garage had become the last place I stood before everything ended. I forced my attention back to Mark. "I'm sorry." "Don't say you're sorry like this is some coworker's problem. We need help." There it was. "What are the surgeons saying?" He launched into a confused version of what I already knew. The leg had severe damage. There was a more aggressive effort to preserve it, but the risks were significant. The other path was earlier amputation and a more predictable recovery. The surgeons had emphasized there was no guarantee. "Either way, what do you think?" he demanded. "I'm not her surgeon. You work in healthcare. I work in risk and compliance. You know how to read medical information better than we do. Then ask the doctors to explain it again until you understand it." He went quiet. When he spoke again, his voice was harder. "You're really doing this now." "Doing what?" "Acting like she's not family." I opened my car door but did not get in. "She is family." Then Then help us decide. You're her parents. The silence lasted long enough that I heard a distant car alarm. Helen took the phone. Her voice was already broken from crying. Claire, honey, please. The old name and the old tone, the one that had always worked. Helen, they want us to sign papers. Then read them. How can I sign something that says amputation? You don't have to choose that. Then what do we choose? I shut my eyes. In my previous life, I had carried exactly this weight, and they had spent years telling me I had no right to touch it. Now they were trying to hand it back. Ask the medical team which risks they consider most urgent. Ask what changes if you delay. Ask what recovery looks like under each option. Then decide with the information they give you. Helen began crying harder. You know, Sophie, she'll hate us if we let them take her leg. There it was, not survival, not infection, not long-term function, hatred. They were afraid of becoming the people Sophie blamed. My fingers tightened around the phone. You cannot make this decision based on who she might hate. Easy for you to say. I almost laughed. Easy. No, I said. It isn't. She did not understand. I continued. But it is still your decision. Mark took the phone again. So you're refusing to come? Yes. The word felt clean. Your cousin is in surgery and you're going home. She is in a hospital surrounded by doctors. Her parents are speaking to them. You can be so cold. Maybe. He breathed heavily. We took you in after your mother died. The debt, he had reached for it sooner than I expected. You let me stay with you for 4 months when I was 19. We were there for you. Yes. And I've been there for your family for 8 years. That doesn't make me Sophie's third parent. He hung up. I stood beside my car for another minute. Then I drove home. I did not go to St. Matthew. I did not open medical databases. I did not call a surgeon I knew. I did not search limb salvage studies until dawn. I ordered noodles from the restaurant downstairs, showered, and reviewed the notes from the compliance meeting. At some point a family group notification appeared on my tablet. Helen had written, we chose to try to save her leg. Please pray. Then another message, we couldn't give up on her. I read that line twice, couldn't give up on her, as if amputation had meant giving up, as if my choice in the previous life had been abandonment rather than survival. I took a screenshot. I did not know if I would ever need it, but I had learned that memory inside my family changed according to whoever needed innocence most. This time, I intended to keep receipts. Chapter 3, Hope. For a while, their choice looked brilliant. That was the dangerous part. Sophie's first limb salvage operation lasted much of the night. The surgeons stabilized what they could, repaired blood flow, and told Mark and Helen the next several days would matter more than any one procedure. I knew all of that only because Helen posted updates in the family group. I did not ask. I did not need to. Every message was written as if she were documenting a miracle in progress. She's stable. Doctors say there is still a chance. They saved her leg. That last one arrived before anyone could possibly know the final outcome. The family responded with hearts, prayer hands, and praise. You made the right choice. A mother knows. Sophie is lucky to have you. I stared at the messages over breakfast. In my previous life, I had received no praise when Sophie survived, only silence until she woke, then blame. I closed the group chat. At work, Denise asked me to stay after a team meeting. The reviewers sent preliminary feedback. My stomach tightened out of habit. She smiled. They specifically mentioned your preparation. I looked at her. Really, really. She leaned back in her chair. You know the senior clinical risk role we've been discussing? I did. In my previous life, another manager had received it. Applications open next month. I want you in the pool. Something in my chest shifted. It was not joy exactly. It was the sensation of seeing a road that had always existed but had once been hidden behind somebody else's emergency. I will apply. Good. She studied me. Everything okay with your family? I could have told her. I did not. They're handling it. The answer was simple and, for the first time, true. 2 days later, Mark called asking whether I knew anything about prior authorization for rehabilitation facilities. No, you do this stuff all the time. Not for your insurer. Can you at least look at the policy? I pictured the previous life, a kitchen table covered in documents, Mark pacing while I called insurance, Helen making tea, Sophie lying in the next room, furious at me but perfectly willing to let me solve the bill. No, he exhaled sharply. You're still mad. I'm not doing unpaid case management. She's your cousin. Hire a patient advocate. That costs money. Yes, so you could help, but you're choosing not to, correct? He had no script for the answer. I ended the call. That evening, Helen sent me a private photo of Sophie asleep in the intensive care unit. Her face was bruised, tubes ran everywhere, one leg was wrapped in layers of dressings and external supports. Please come see her. Helen wrote, I sat with the image for a long time. Sophie was not yet the woman who would accuse me online, not in this life. She had not done anything to me yet. The bitterness I carried belonged to history only I remembered. I almost went, then I asked myself why. To comfort Sophie, she was sedated. To comfort Helen, maybe, to prove I was not cruel. There it was, the old trap. I replied, I'm glad she's stable. I hope recovery goes well. Nothing more. Helen did not answer. The next morning, the family group celebrated again. One surgeon had reportedly said the limb looked better than expected. Mark wrote, we saved her leg. I saved that message too. Then I went to work. Chapter 4. Sophie's voice. Sophie woke fully enough to understand what had happened about a week after the crash. Helen called me from the hospital corridor. She's asking for people. Okay, she asked where you are. That surprised me. What did you say? That you've been busy with work. That's true, Claire. Please don't make this into a principle. I almost smiled. Everything becomes a principle when someone dislikes your boundary. I'll send her a message. She wants to see you. I'll send a message. Helen went quiet. Fine. I recorded a short voice note. I told Sophie I was glad she was awake. I told her recovery would be difficult and that she should ask questions until she understood every step. I wished her strength. I did not say I would visit. She replied a few hours later, why didn't you answer Mom and Dad? Not how are you, not thank you, straight to the service I had failed to provide. I typed, I was in a restricted work review. By the time I was available, your parents were already speaking with your doctors. She wrote, Dad said you could have helped them decide. I looked at the message, there it was already. The family was building a backup scapegoat before the final medical outcome even existed. I replied, the decision belonged to you, your parents, and your medical team. She sent nothing else. Several days later, she posted her first public update. Sophie already had a moderate social media following from dance clips and student lifestyle videos. The crash multiplied it overnight. Her post showed a hospital bracelet, a blanket, and a hand giving a thumbs up. Still here, still fighting. My parents refused to give up on me, and the surgeons are doing everything they can to save my leg. The comments praised courage. One said, you have amazing parents. Sophie liked it. I turned off the app. The phrase, refuse to give up, kept appearing. People love moral clarity when the outcome is uncertain. Saving a limb sounds brave. Amputation sounds like surrender. No one wants to write a caption about competing risks. The next surgery was harder. I learned that from Mark, who called after it ended. There's infection. His voice had lost some of its confidence. I'm sorry. They cleaned it out. They want to watch closely. Okay. Can you recommend an infectious disease specialist? No, Claire. St. Matthew has specialists. Ask the treating team whether they want another consult. You're impossible lately. I'm not Sophie's care coordinator. Nobody asked you to be. I almost laughed. You just did. He hung up. The infection improved temporarily. Then another complication appeared. The surgeons discussed another procedure. Sophie was now awake enough to participate. Helen wrote in the family group that the doctors had explained the increased risk. Sophie wanted to keep trying. Her exact words, according to Helen, were, I want my leg. Mark replied, then we fight for it. The family rallied again. I watched from a distance. No one asked me to sign. No one could later say my hand had held the pen. I felt guilty for the relief. Then I reminded myself that guilt was not proof of wrongdoing. Sophie was speaking for herself. That was what everyone had claimed to want in my previous life. Now she had it. Chapter 5. The second surgery. The second major setback came quietly. There was no dramatic family announcement at first, only silence. The group chat went from updates every few hours to nothing for almost a day. Then Helen called. I answered after work. They say more tissue is dying. Her voice sounded older. I'm sorry. They want to talk about amputation again. I sat at my kitchen counter. A part of me had been waiting for this call since I woke in my old life, not hoping for it, waiting. Then talk to them. You sound like a recorded message. What do you want me to say? I want you to help. How? Read the reports. Talk to somebody. Tell us whether they're giving up too soon. My stomach tightened. Giving up, again. Helen, I am not going to evaluate Sophie's surgeons from outside her care team. You know hospital systems. Systems are not surgery. Then tell me what questions to ask. I almost refused. Then I chose something narrower. Ask what has changed since the last procedure. Ask what the risk is if you delay further. Ask what level of amputation they expect now compared with earlier. Ask Sophie what she understands. Then let the doctors document the conversation. Helen was quiet. That's it. That's it. You don't think we should keep trying? I didn't say that. You don't think we should stop? I didn't say that either. She became angry. You're doing this on purpose. Doing what? Refusing to say what you think. I looked at the dark window over my sink. In my previous life, saying what I thought had become a life sentence. Yes, I said, I am. She hung up. The next day, Sophie posted a tearful video. She had lost weight. Her face looked pale. She spoke from a hospital bed with a blanket pulled high. The doctors want to stop trying, she said. I don't. Thousands of strangers flooded the comments. Fight, never give up. Doctors don't know everything. Get another opinion. Miracles happen. I watched less than a minute. Medicine is hard enough without an audience. Voting on it, Mark and Helen requested another opinion. The new team did not promise a miracle. They agreed there were options to attempt, but they emphasized the same uncertainty and increasing risk. Sophie chose to continue. She signed the documents herself. I knew because Helen, perhaps defensively, sent a photo of the signature page to the family group with the medical details covered. Sophie's choice, she wrote. We're supporting her. I saved that too. The family was creating a record without realizing it. This time, history would not be rewritten so easily. Meanwhile, the senior risk position opened at work. I submitted my application. Rachel brought coffee to my desk. You finally did it. I did. Good. Denise would murder you if you chicken out. That seems like a compliance concern. She laughed. For a few minutes, my life contained nothing but a job application and bad coffee. It felt luxurious. Then my phone buzzed. Mark, another surgery tomorrow. You should come. I stared at the message. In the past, had worked on me like a command. I typed, I hope it goes well. Then I put the phone face down and continued editing my resume. Chapter 6. What it cost. The third operation did not save the leg, neither did the fourth. By then, even the language in Sophie's updates had changed. She stopped saying they were saving it. She said they were fighting complications. Mark stopped posting entirely. Helen called me late one evening and cried without speaking for almost a minute. I let her. They say there isn't a real choice anymore. I knew what she meant. I'm sorry. They have to amputate higher than they would have before. I gripped the edge of my table. There it was, the outcome I had remembered without wanting to see repeated. In my previous life, the surgeons had amputated lower and earlier. Sophie's recovery had still been brutal, but her medical course had stabilized. She had hated me for that decision. In this life, she and her parents had received exactly the agency they said I had stolen. The leg was still lost, only after more surgeries, more infection, more damage, more pain, and more time. Helen whispered, did we make the wrong choice? I closed my eyes. This was the question I had once begged someone to answer for me. Was I wrong? Had I ruined Sophie? Could I have waited? No one had given me mercy then. I still refused to become cruel now. You made the choice you thought was right with the information you had, she sobbed. That sounds like something people say when it was wrong. Sometimes there isn't a choice without loss. You always say things like that now, because they're true. What would you have done? The question struck through me. I knew, I had done it, I had signed, had lived and died under the weight of that signature. It doesn't matter, I said. Of course it matters. No, it doesn't. I wasn't the parent, patient, or surgeon. She went silent, then, bitterly, convenient. I almost laughed. No, Helen, convenient was having me make the decision so nobody else had to own it. She hung up. I sat alone for a long time. I had not planned to say that, but once spoken, the truth did not feel cruel, it felt overdue. Sophie's amputation happened the next day. I did not attend. I sent flowers through the hospital gift service, no card beyond, wishing you strength and recovery. Claire. Mark returned them. The florist called to ask for another delivery address. Donate them, I said. To whom? Anyone who wants flowers. At work. The interview panel for the senior role asked me how I handled emotionally charged decisions involving patient care. The question almost made me laugh. I answered professionally. I separate empathy from ownership. We should care deeply about outcomes without pretending every outcome is ours to control. Clear roles protect patients and staff. One panelist wrote something down. I felt the old life folding into the new one without owning it. 2 weeks later, I got the promotion. Sophie was still hospitalized. I did not tell my family. For once, my good news did not need to coexist with their crisis. It could simply be mine. Chapter 7. Who signed? Sophie asked the question after the surgery. I learned about it from my aunt, not from Sophie herself. Helen called and said, she wants to know who signed. I leaned back in my office chair. The same question, different life. And, Mark and I signed the final consent. Okay. And she had signed the earlier continuation forms herself. Okay. Helen's breathing changed. She wanted me to say more. I did not. She's angry, she finally said. I can imagine. She says we should have stopped sooner. The words were almost funny in their cruelty. What did you say? I told her she begged us not to let them amputate, and, she said she had just woken up and was terrified. She probably was. Claire, whose side are you on? I stared at the phone. There it was again, a side. Every family crisis needed teams. No one's. That's impossible. No, it's new. She hung up. A few days later, Sophie called me directly. I almost let it go to voicemail, then I answered. Hi. Her voice sounded rough. You knew this could happen. No greeting, no congratulations on my promotion, which she did not know about anyway, just accusation. I knew the doctors were concerned. Dad says you work with this stuff, not surgery. You knew what questions to ask. I gave your parents questions. You could have told them to amputate earlier. I closed my eyes. There it was. The universe had twisted far enough that Sophie was now angry I had not told them to do the exact thing she had hated me for in another life. You wanted them to keep trying, I said. I was scared. I know. They were supposed to protect me. I know. And you knew better. My sympathy thinned. Sophie, your surgeons knew better than I did. They explained the risks. Your parents listened. You listened. You made a choice. So you're blaming me? No, that's what it sounds like. I'm refusing to be blamed instead. Silence. Then she said, if you had answered the hospital that day, maybe none of this would have happened. I felt something inside me go still. The scapegoat had found the fence. She was testing it. I was at work. People leave work for family. Sometimes. You left me alone. You were in a hospital with your parents participating in your care. They were overseas at first, and the hospital reached them. Her breathing sharpened. You don't care. I care that you're alive. I lost my leg. I know, you sound like a robot. Maybe I did, but the previous Claire had cried, paid, apologized, researched, drove, argued, and nearly begged Sophie to believe she had tried to save her. That Claire still died a monster in Sophie's story. I was done auditioning for Innocence. I hope rehab goes well, I said. Don't call me again, okay? She hung up. I did not call. Chapter 8. The bills. Medical bills have a way of turning abstract family love into spreadsheets. Mark discovered that quickly. Insurance covered much of Sophie's hospital care, but not everything. Repeated procedures created layers of cost. Specialized rehabilitation brought different networks, deductibles, equipment limits, and approval requirements. In my previous life, I had handled almost all of it. I remembered sitting on hold with an insurer while Sophie posted a video about learning to use crutches. I remembered negotiating a prosthetic pre-authorization while Helen told relatives I had made the decision. Without them, I remembered transferring money for an upgraded socket because Mark said the family was stretched thin. This time, Mark sent me a photograph of a denial letter. Can you fix this? I replied, no. His answer came immediately. You didn't even read it, correct? Claire, hire a patient advocate or appeal through the insurer's process. You know how. That doesn't make it my job. He called. I let it ring until it stopped. Then Helen called. I answered because she had not been abusive in her last message. Please help us with one appeal. No, it would take you 10 minutes. Then it should take the advocate 10 minutes. They charge. Yes. She exhaled slowly. You're really going to charge family? I'm not charging you. I'm declining the work. She had no response. I almost smiled. The family began to learn the true price of all the labor they had treated as natural. Forms took time, phone calls took patience, appeals took knowledge. Finding the right rehabilitation provider took research. Every task they had once called a quick favor became somebody's paid profession once Claire stopped doing it for free. Mark's small restaurant began to suffer. He had owned a breakfast and lunch place for years. It was never hugely profitable, but it supported their household. With Sophie in and out of the hospital, he missed shifts, changed schedules, and let management problems accumulate. He called me about a business loan. I don't do business finance. You understand documents, so does your accountant. He's expensive. I laughed. Mark snapped. What is funny? Nothing. But it was funny. The entire family was discovering that competence had market value. They had simply never paid mine. Meanwhile, my promotion became official. Denise handed me the letter in her office. Senior Clinical Risk Manager. I read the title twice. You earned it. I almost told her I had once lost it. Instead, I said, thank you. Rachel took me out for drinks after work. Not a family emergency, not a hospital cafeteria, a crowded restaurant with bad music and fried food. She raised her glass. To Claire finally getting paid for being annoyingly prepared. I laughed. I'll accept that. My phone buzzed in my purse. I did not check it until we were leaving. A message from Helen. Sophie needs a new rehabilitation place. The current one isn't working. Please at least send recommendations. I looked at the screen, then I typed, ask her medical team for a referral list. I put the phone away. Rachel glanced at me. Family, yes, everything okay? I thought about it. Not everything. Then I smiled. But I am. Chapter 9. the channel. Sophie returned online before she returned to school. At first, I admired her. That truth bothered me. Her early videos were honest without being cruel. She showed difficult rehabilitation days, bad moods, prosthetic fittings, inaccessible buildings, awkward questions from strangers. She spoke about grief without pretending. Bravery was constant. People responded. Her following grew. She received sponsorships from adaptive clothing companies and mobility brands. For a while, I thought perhaps this life would be different in ways that had nothing to do with me. Then the tone shifted. The videos about recovery performed well. The videos about blame performed better. She posted one called The Decision That Changed My Body Forever. I watched because Rachel sent me the link with a cautious message. Is this about your cousin? Sophie sat in a bright room with soft music behind her. When you're unconscious, she said, your life can be changed by decisions other people make for you. Technically true. Then she described the repeated attempts to save her leg. My parents were terrified, I was terrified, we were given impossible choices. Still true. Then, there was also a relative in our family who understood the medical system better than anyone else. The hospital tried to reach her at the beginning. She turned off her phone. My chest tightened. Sophie looked directly into the camera. Sometimes abandonment is also a decision. There it was, the old story, adapting to the new facts. In the previous life, I had answered and become the villain for acting. This life, I had not answered and became the villain for absence. The comments filled quickly. How could someone ignore a hospital? If she worked in healthcare, she knew what was at stake. Family should show up. One person wrote, maybe the cousin knew amputation was needed and didn't want the responsibility. Sophie liked the comment. I stared at that small digital heart. There was the entire case. She wanted me to have known. She wanted me to have carried the responsibility. She wanted the right outcome without the pain of choosing it. I called our legal department before the video spread further, not because I wanted to sue Sophie, because my employer's name was already appearing in comments. I gave counsel the basic facts. I had been working. My phone was off under normal meeting procedure. I was not Sophie's physician. I had not directed or delayed care. Her parents had been contacted. Later, Sophie herself participated in medical decisions. Counsel asked whether I wanted to issue a statement. Not yet. Why? Because she'll keep talking. I knew Sophie. Attention rewarded escalation. She posted another video 3 days later. This one was titled When Family Doesn't Show Up. She never said my full name. Her followers did. Someone found my professional profile. Then my employer received the first complaint. A stranger accused me of unethical conduct for refusing emergency care to a relative. The complaint was nonsense. It still had to be logged. Denise called me in. I know this is personal, she said. I'm sorry it's reaching work. Don't apologize. Tell me what happened. I did, not the previous life, the actual events. When I finished, Denise stared at me. That's it. You were in the audit meeting. Yes. And after that her parents had medical authority. Yes. And she later made decisions herself. Yes. Denise leaned back. Then this is easy, annoying, but easy. I almost cried, not because she defended me, because she saw facts and did not ask me to apologize for existing inside them. We prepared a brief internal record. No public fight. Not yet. I waited. Sophie kept talking. Chapter 10. No perfect villain. The internet prefers a clean villain. Sophie knew how to provide one. She told stories about childhood moments when I had been controlling. I corrected her college application essay because I thought I knew better. I told her not to use a credit card she could not afford. I once refused to lend her my car after she had been drinking. Every responsible boundary became evidence that I had always wanted power over her. The irony was exquisite. In this life, I had refused power over her most important decision. She hated me anyway. Mark called after one of her videos passed 1 million views. Can you tell her to stop? I laughed. Why me? She listens to you more than us. Does she? He was silent. She is destroying us, he said. How? She says we kept putting her through surgery because we were afraid to let go. Didn't you, Claire? I'm asking. We were trying to save her leg. I know. She makes it sound selfish. I looked at the report on my desk. Was part of it fear that she would hate you if you agreed to amputation? He went quiet, had my answer. That's not fair, he said. No, it isn't. You're enjoying this. The accusation surprised me. Was I? I searched myself carefully. There was satisfaction. Yes, not in Sophie's pain, not in Mark and Helen's marriage fraying. The satisfaction came from watching responsibility stop at the correct address. I'm not enjoying her suffering, I said. I'm relieved I'm not the person you all can blame for it. You still could have helped, and if I'd told you to amputate, what would Sophie be saying about me now? He did not answer. Mark, we don't know. I smiled without humor. I do. Too close. He could not know why. I corrected quickly. I know your family." He hung up soon after. Sophie published a long video blaming her parents directly. "They were more afraid of being the people who gave up than they were of making me suffer through procedure after procedure," she said. "Helen called me crying. Can you believe she said that? I thought of her words on the phone after the crash. If we sign, Sophie will hate us forever." "Yes," I said. "You agree with her." "I didn't say that. Nobody is on our side." "Maybe stop looking for sides." She accused me of being heartless and hung up. A week later, Sophie attacked the surgeon who had first recommended earlier amputation, then the insurance company, then the rehabilitation center, then a former friend who stopped visiting. A pattern emerged publicly. People noticed. One commenter wrote, "Every person in this story eventually becomes the person who failed her." The comment received thousands of likes. Sophie deleted it. Screenshots remained. The perfect villain was getting crowded. Chapter 11, The Accident File, the crash itself. Returned to the story through an insurance dispute. Sophie had always described herself as a passive passenger. The car had been driven by her friend Ava. Rain had started. The exit ramp was slick. Another vehicle changed lanes. Everyone knew the broad facts. What had not become public was the video recovered from Sophie's phone. She had been live streaming from the passenger seat. The footage entered a civil case over fault allocation. Once lawyers referenced it in public filings, pieces leaked. I did not search for the clip. Rachel showed me because she thought I should know before the internet did what it always did. Sophie was laughing. Music played loudly. Ava told her to stop filming near her face. Sophie turned the camera toward herself. "She drives like somebody's grandmother," she joked. Ava told her the road was wet. Sophie said, "We're late, go." Later she teased Ava again for slowing down. None of that meant Sophie caused the crash. The official investigation still involved road conditions and multiple vehicles, but the footage destroyed the image she had cultivated of sitting quietly while disaster simply chose her. Her audience turned vicious, too vicious. I hated watching it. People mocked her disability. They said she deserved the crash. They called her reckless and stupid. That was not justice. I posted one public statement from my verified professional account, the first I had made about her at all. Sophie did not deserve her injuries. A passenger's poor judgment does not justify harassment, and disability is not punishment. Please stop using this case as an excuse to attack her body." Rachel stared at me when she read it. "After everything, her followers coming after me doesn't make this okay. You are annoyingly principled, apparently." Sophie responded the next day. She did not thank me. She said, "It's interesting when people defend you publicly after abandoning you privately." I laughed, actually laughed. The woman at the next desk looked over. "Sorry," I said. There was no winning Sophie's moral game because the rules changed to preserve one conclusion. Sophie suffered, therefore someone else owed her. Mark's restaurant closed temporarily around the same time. He had missed too much work. Costs rose, staff left, debt accumulated. He asked me to help negotiate with his lender. I refused. He called my refusal revenge. "You want to see us lose everything? No, then help." Those aren't the only two choices. He did not understand. That had been my family's emotional logic for years. If you love us, act. If you do not act, you want us hurt. There was no room for, "I care, and this is still yours," so I created the room myself. Chapter 12. The statement. My employer received 11 complaints in 1 week. Most were copies of the same paragraph. Someone had organized them. The messages accused me of unethical conduct, professional negligence, abandonment, and making a vulnerable young woman pay for a family dispute. Our legal department traced the template to a fan group associated with Sophie's channel. The old fear came back so quickly my body remembered it before my thoughts did. Parking garage, footsteps, a stranger saying Sophie's name. I began checking behind me when I left work. I hated that. I refused to let another life shrink around someone else's audience. Our legal counsel recommended a public factual statement. This time, I agreed. It was short. On the day of Sophie's accident, I was participating in a scheduled confidential compliance review and my private phone was powered off in accordance with meeting protocol. I was not a member of Sophie's treating team and did not direct or delay her medical care. Her parents were subsequently contacted and participated in treatment decisions. Once Sophie regained decision-making capacity, she also participated directly in subsequent choices. I did not make Sophie's medical decisions. That is precisely why she cannot fairly assign those decisions to me now. We attached no private medical records, no humiliation, no attack, only verifiable facts. The reaction was immediate. A health law commentator summarized the situation in plain language. Being listed as an emergency contact does not make a cousin the permanent owner of another adult's medical outcome. That sentence spread. People began asking Sophie questions she did not like. what exactly did she expect Claire to do? If Claire had told the parents to amputate early, would Sophie have thanked her? If Claire had told them to keep trying and the limbs still failed, would Claire be blamed then? If Claire was not the surgeon, why was her judgment supposed to override the doctor's? Sophie posted an angry response. This isn't about whether Claire had legal responsibility, it's about family. There it was, when facts failed, family entered. Mark shared her post, Helen did not. That was new. 2 days later, Helen called me. I told Sophie to stop talking about you. I was surprised. Why? Because she's not being fair. I almost dropped the phone. The words were years late and from another life, but my body still recognized them as something I had once desperately wanted. Thank you. Helen started crying. She says I'm choosing you over her. You're not. I know. She sounded exhausted. I keep thinking about that first night. I waited. I kept saying I couldn't sign away her leg because she'd hate me. My throat tightened. I remember. Maybe that was selfish. I did not rescue her from the thought. Maybe part of it was. She cried harder. You could have said something kinder. You called me because you wanted truth. I don't know what I want anymore. Then stop asking other people to decide that too. She laughed through tears, a real laugh. For the first time since the crash, we ended a call without one of us hanging up in anger. Chapter 13. Megan Lewis existed in this life too. I found out when security flagged a woman who had appeared twice near our office lobby. My blood went cold when I saw the photograph. Same face, same dark hair, same person who had followed me through a parking garage in my previous life. She looked younger here because she was. I did not tell anyone I knew her. I told security I had concerns due to online harassment connected to my cousin's channel. They documented the visits and increased escorts during the period of greatest attention. Then I did something the old Claire would have considered dramatic. I contacted police before anything happened, not to accuse Megan of a crime she had not committed, to document the pattern. She had sent public messages tagging my employer. She had appeared near a controlled office area twice. That was enough to ask for guidance. The officer told me to preserve everything and call immediately if she attempted contact. I did. I changed nothing about my work. I did not stop parking in the garage. I simply stopped believing caution was an overreaction. Megan sent me a message several days later. You should apologize to Sophie. I did not answer. Another. She lost everything and you act like you had nothing to do with it. I forwarded it to security. Then, people like you always hide behind rules. I almost replied. I did not. Silence was no longer surrender, it was documentation. Megan showed up again near the building. This time security intercepted her before she reached employee parking. She insisted she only wanted to deliver a letter. Police issued a formal warning and documented the incident. No chase, no struggle, no blood on concrete. I sat in Denise's office afterward with my hands shaking. Take the rest of the day, she said. I can work. I know. Go home anyway. I laughed weakly. That's new. What is? Someone telling me I can leave without making me responsible for what happens next. She looked confused. Claire, that's what managers are for. I nearly cried. Megan eventually stopped appearing. Her account disappeared from Sophie's public fan group after moderators began enforcing rules against harassment. I never knew whether she changed her mind or simply became afraid of consequences. It did not matter. I survived the parking garage this time, not because fate became kind, because I had stopped waiting for danger to prove itself beyond doubt before protecting me. Chapter 14. Evan leaves. Sophie's boyfriend, Evan, stayed longer in this life. In the previous one, he had drifted away months after the amputation. Sophie had blamed me for that too. Claire took my leg, and then she took my relationship. That was how she described it in one video. This time, she had no such convenient chain. Evan attended rehabilitation sessions. He helped Sophie move into an accessible apartment. He appeared in cheerful videos about learning a new normal. For a while, their audience loved him, then they started fighting publicly. Sophie accused him of being tired of her disability. Evan denied it. She filmed a tearful story after he spent a weekend with friends. He responded privately. According to messages she later shared, please stop turning every disagreement into proof that I'm abandoning you because of your leg. Sophie posted the screenshot to prove he was insensitive. Most comments disagreed. That angered her more. Their breakup came after she accused him of siding with her parents during an argument about the surgeries. Evan released one statement and then deleted his public accounts. I did not leave Sophie because she is disabled. I left because every conflict eventually became a trial where somebody had to be guilty for her pain. I could not live as the next defendant. The line spread everywhere. Sophie went silent for several days. Then she returned angrier. She blamed Evan, she blamed her parents, she mentioned me again. Her sponsors started pulling back, not because she was disabled, because brands hate unpredictable public fights. One adaptive fashion company ended a campaign after Sophie attacked a rehabilitation clinic by name, and the clinic produced records showing they had repeatedly accommodated her requests. Her audience split. The people who came for recovery content left. The people who stayed came for drama. That is a cruel kind of popularity. It feeds on the exact behavior that destroys you. Helen called me after Evan's statement. She says everyone leaves. Some people do. She says it's because none of us can handle what happened to her. Maybe some of you can't. You always have an answer. No, I just stopped pretending. Every answer makes the pain go away. Helen sighed. Mark and I are fighting all the time. I waited. He says I pushed too hard to keep trying with the leg. I say he did. We both did. Yes, Sophie says we did it for ourselves. Maybe partly. Whose side are you on? I smiled. Still no one's. She gave a tired laugh. I hate that answer. I know. Maybe that's why it's useful. That was the closest Helen had come to understanding me. It was enough for that day. Chapter 15. The restaurant. Mark's restaurant closed before Sophie's second year of recovery, not because of one dramatic failure. Businesses rarely die that neatly. There were staffing problems, late payments, a failed equipment repair, higher rent, and months when Mark's attention belonged somewhere else. He had always relied on Helen to manage the household and me to handle anything involving forms, disputes, or planning. When Sophie was injured, Helen collapsed into caregiving and I stepped out of the family service role. The invisible labor disappeared. Mark felt the loss everywhere. He called me after the landlord posted a notice. I need you to look at the lease. No, it's one document. Hire a lawyer. You know what lawyers cost. Yes, you don't care if I lose the restaurant. I care. Then help me. The old equation again, I finally said. Caring and taking over are not the same thing. That's something people say when they want to feel good about doing nothing. I let the insult pass. Maybe, your parents would be ashamed of you. That one landed. My mother had been Mark's older sister. After she died, he often invoked her whenever he wanted moral authority. I stared at the framed photo on my desk, my mother smiling beside me at graduation. I had spent years wondering what she would think of the person I became in the previous life. Now I asked a different question. What would she think of how much I had been asked to carry? Don't use my dead parents to negotiate free labor, I said. Mark inhaled sharply. Claire, we're done. I ended the call. The restaurant closed weeks later. A family cousin called to lecture me. You could have saved it. Could I? You know people. So does Mark. He's had a terrible year. Yes, family is supposed to show up. I almost laughed. I showed up for years. You just didn't notice because I did it quietly. That ended the conversation. Mark blamed me publicly once, only once. He told a relative that the business might have survived if I had helped restructure the debt. Another cousin, surprisingly, asked him, why did your restaurant depend on your niece working for free? The question circulated through the family. No one had an answer. The narrative began changing, not because I campaigned, because once I stopped doing the work, everyone could finally see how much work had existed. Chapter 16. The divorce. Mark and Helen separated quietly. There was no explosive announcement, no affair, no secret second family, just exhaustion hardened into blame. Mark said Helen had encouraged Sophie's worst instincts. Helen said Mark had treated every crisis like a problem someone else should solve. Sophie accused both of abandoning her. They moved from the family house into separate rentals. The house itself was sold because the medical bills and restaurant losses had become too much. Helen asked to meet me for coffee. I almost refused. Then I went. She looked different without Mark beside her, smaller, but not weaker. She stirred her drink for a long time before speaking. Sophie won't stay with me. Okay, she says living together is bad for her mental health. Maybe it is. Helen gave me a wounded look. You don't have to agree with everything she says. I don't. Then say she's wrong. I smiled. You still want me to make the ruling? She stopped stirring. For once, she heard it. Oh, yes. Her eyes filled. Was I always like this? I considered lying. I did not. Often. She nodded. When you were younger, I thought you liked being needed. I did. That surprised her. You did. Being useful felt safer than needing anything. We sat with that. My parents had died when I was in college. Mark and Helen had taken me into their home for a few months. I had been grateful enough to spend the next decade proving I deserved the rescue retroactively. Every form I completed, every ride, every insurance appeal, every favor had been another installment on a debt they had never formally demanded but never discouraged either. Helen whispered, we should have stopped you. I should have stopped too. You were a kid, not forever. She nodded. After a while, she said, now I understand how tired you were. I looked at her. Do you understand because you see me, or because there is nobody left to do things for you? The question hurt her. It was supposed to, not as punishment, as clarity. She wiped her face. Both. That answer was honest enough for me. I did not offer to pay her rent. I did not invite her to move in. I gave her the number of a divorce financial counselor because she asked where to start, a number, not a rescue. We hugged before leaving. It was the first time I had hugged her in this life without feeling a hand reach for my wallet, calendar, or expertise at the same time. That mattered. Chapter 17. Promotion. My second promotion came with an office that had a door. I closed it on the first day and sat behind the desk for 5 full minutes doing nothing. Director of Clinical Risk and Patient Advocacy. The title felt almost absurd. In my previous life, my career had stalled beneath Sophie's crisis. I had remained competent, useful, and permanently distracted. Managers liked me but did not trust my availability for larger responsibilities. This life was different because I stopped treating every family emergency as a summons, led a project reviewing emergency contact procedures across our hospital network. The idea did not come from revenge, it came from patterns. Staff often confused emergency contact, surrogate decision-maker, next of kin, and person authorized for specific information. Families misunderstood too. When outcomes turned bad, unclear communication became another source of grief. We built clearer documentation, staff scripts explaining roles, better notes showing who had been contacted and when, patient-facing materials about what an emergency contact could and could not be expected to do, more explicit recording of patient participation once capacity returned. Denise, now my vice president, reviewed the proposal. This is good, thank you. Personal experience. I smiled. Some. She did not pry. The project received attention outside our system. I spoke at professional meetings. I wrote articles about role clarity and high-stress family decisions. I became known for one sentence that appeared in a training slide: empathy does not require ownership. Rachel mocked me relentlessly. You're a quote on a slide now. I know. It's horrifying. Next you'll have a podcast. I would rather resign. We laughed. My life became full in ordinary ways: friends, work, travel. A small condo with a balcony where I grew herbs badly, no boyfriend, no secret billionaire, no man arriving to prove I had finally been chosen correctly. I had spent enough of my life being evaluated by family. I did not need romance as another verdict. When Sophie learned about my promotion, she posted a vague comment about people profiting from trauma they caused. I did not respond. Her audience was smaller now. The people who stayed were mostly those who wanted conflict. Without my participation, there was less to feed them. Her life did not become happy. It also did not end. She returned to school part-time. She changed majors. She continued using a prosthesis, sometimes a wheelchair. She remained angry. That was hers. I stopped needing her to become wise in order for my second life to feel justified. Some people never learn the lesson you wish they would. The real freedom is discovering you can still graduate from the class. Chapter 18. The Forum. The confrontation happened 3 years after the crash at a patient rights forum hosted by our hospital group and a local university. I was on a panel about family decision-making under medical uncertainty. Sophie was invited separately as a patient advocate and disability content creator. I considered withdrawing, then I refused to surrender another professional room because Sophie might be uncomfortable in it. We sat at opposite ends of the stage. She looked good, not unchanged, good. Her prosthetic leg was visible beneath a tailored skirt. She had learned how to move with it confidently. Her hair was shorter. Her expression remained familiar. For most of the forum, we were civil. Then an audience member asked about the emotional burden placed on extended family members when parents were unavailable. The moderator looked toward me. Before I could answer, Sophie leaned toward her microphone. Sometimes extended family simply chooses not to show up. The room shifted. The moderator hesitated. Sophie continued. My cousin knew more about medical risk than my parents did. The hospital tried to reach her after my accident. Her phone was off. My parents made decisions they weren't equipped to make, and I lived with the outcome. My pulse stayed steady. I had imagined this moment for years, not the public stage. The accusation, why didn't you answer? I lifted my microphone. My phone was off because I was participating in a confidential work review. Sophie laughed bitterly. Work, yes, work. You knew what was at stake. Afterward, yes, you could have told my parents what to do. The room went silent. I looked at her, and if you hated the outcome, whose fault would it have been? She froze. I did not look away. If I had told them to amputate earlier, would you have thanked me? Her mouth tightened. That's not the point. It is exactly the point. The moderator started to intervene. I raised one hand. I am not discussing Sophie's private medical details. I am discussing roles. Then I turned back to the audience. Being capable of helping does not automatically make a decision yours. Sophie had doctors, she had parents, later, she had her own voice, every one of those people had responsibilities appropriate to their role. I was not the patient, parent, or surgeon. Sophie said, "You were family." Yes, then why wasn't that enough? I took a breath. Because family is not a license to transfer every unbearable choice to the person most likely to say yes. No one moved. I continued more quietly. You all wanted an outcome with no loss, when reality did not offer one. You wanted someone else to carry the guilt. For once, that person wasn't me. Sophie's eyes filled. If it were you, what would you have chosen? There it was, the question from both lives. I knew the answer. I had signed it once. I had paid for it with everything. It doesn't matter, I said. Of course it matters. No, it was never my body. It was never supposed to be my decision, and it was never supposed to become my guilt. The moderator finally stepped in. The forum continued. Afterward, Sophie left without speaking to me. I did not chase her. That was another old habit I had retired. Chapter 19. After the stage, the forum clip spread online. Of course it did, but something had changed. Years earlier, I had been terrified of being misunderstood by strangers. Now I knew misunderstanding was not fatal if the people who mattered had facts. Some viewers sided with Sophie. They said family should have shown up. Others sided with me. They said a cousin should never be made responsible for an adult patient's impossible medical choice. I did not read enough comments to become addicted to either side. My employer issued no special statement, no investigation opened, no stranger waited outside my office. The world moved on. Sophie posted once. I asked a question I had wanted answered for years. I did not like Claire's answer, but I heard it. That was all. No accusation, no dramatic music, no invitation to attack anyone. I stared at the post for a long time. Maybe she was changing. Maybe she was tired. Maybe her manager had finally convinced her conflict was destroying her career. I did not need to know. Mark found work managing food service for a corporate cafeteria. He hated having a boss at first, then discovered he liked leaving problems at work instead of carrying business debt home. Helen became more independent after the divorce. She moved into a smaller apartment and learned insurance paperwork the hard way. She once texted me a photograph of an appeal letter she had written herself. Approved, she wrote. I replied with a thumbs up. No editing, no corrections. She did it. Sophie never rebuilt the giant audience she once had, but she kept a smaller channel focused more on accessibility and less on blame. I heard that from relatives. I did not subscribe. Distance was allowed to remain even after the war ended. At work, our emergency contact project received a regional patient safety award. I accepted it with my team, not alone. That mattered too. The old Claire had confused being indispensable with being valuable. The new one liked teams. If I took a vacation, work continued. If I turned off my phone, someone else could answer. If a family member had a problem, the world did not collapse because I did not solve it. Reliability was good, irreplaceability was a trap. Chapter 20. One more call. A year after the forum, St. Matthew Medical Center appeared on my phone again. I was cooking dinner, garlic in a pan, music playing from the living room, rain tapping against the balcony door. For 1 second, my body went back, the old office, the locker, the hospital calls waiting after the meeting. Then I answered. Claire Bennett, a nurse from one of our partner programs, was calling about a risk review question connected to a patient transfer policy. Normal work, nothing to do with Sophie. I listened, clarified the issue, told her which department should handle the next step, and sent a short email afterward. The call lasted only a few minutes. I put the phone down. The garlic had nearly burned. I laughed and turned down the heat. For years, a hospital number had represented a command. Drop everything. Somebody needs you. If you do not act, something terrible will happen and it will be your fault. That belief had cost me an entire life. The truth was smaller. Sometimes the phone rings, sometimes you answer, sometimes you do not, sometimes the person on the other end has other people to call, sometimes doctors keep treating patients even when a cousin is unavailable, sometimes parents make decisions, sometimes patients make their own decisions and hate the outcome anyway. The world does not stop because Claire Bennett is off duty. I plated dinner and carried it to the table. My phone stayed face up beside me. I was not afraid of it anymore. Chapter 21. What I owed. The family debt story faded slowly. Mark had once reminded me constantly that he and Helen had taken me in after my mother died. For years, I had treated those 4 months like a mortgage on the rest of my life. Then one afternoon I found the old notebook where I had tracked expenses during college. It was ridiculous. Had always been a spreadsheet. Person, tuition, scholarships, part-time income, rent, groceries. The months I stayed with Mark and Helen were there too. I had contributed grocery money once I started working again. I had paid my own tuition. I had covered most of my books. They had given me a room, food, an emotional shelter when I was grieving that mattered. It was generous, it was not a lifetime contract. I called Helen. Do you remember when I lived with you after Mom died? Of course. Did you expect me to pay you back forever? She went quiet. No, did Mark. Longer silence. I don't think he thought of it that way at first. At first. What about later? Later, whenever you said no, he remembered everything he'd ever done for you. I smiled sadly. So did I. I'm sorry. I know. We talked for a while, not about Sophie, not about medicine, about my mother. Helen told me a story I had forgotten. About Mom burning a Thanksgiving pie and trying to hide it under whipped cream. I laughed until I cried. That conversation gave me something I had not expected, the ability to separate gratitude from servitude. I could be grateful Mark and Helen sheltered me, I could love them for it, I could also refuse to become their permanent emergency department. The two truths did not cancel each other. That might have been the hardest lesson of all. Chapter 22, Sophie's Choice. I saw Sophie in person again at a family funeral, not Mark or Helen, an older uncle we both loved. The service was small. Sophie arrived alone. She moved with a cane that day instead of her prosthesis. She looked tired. We did not speak until afterward. She found me near the parking lot. For 1 second, every terrible garage memory returned. Then I reminded myself where I was. Daylight, family everywhere. No Megan, no Chase. Sophie said, "Can we talk?" A little. She nodded. We walked toward a row of trees away from the crowd. I watched the form again. She said, I waited. I still think you should have answered. Of course she did. Then she surprised me. But I don't think you owed me the decision. I looked at her. That was more than I had ever expected. Okay, that's all you have to say. What do you want me to say? She laughed bitterly. You always do that now. Do what? Make people say exactly what they want from you? I smiled. It's useful. She looked at the ground. I wanted you to say I was right. About what? That somebody should have prevented all of it. There was the real grief. Not just the leg, the fact that life had offered no path. Where Sophie remained exactly who she had been. I wish somebody could have. I said, her eyes filled. But nobody could. No. She wiped her face. I hate that. I know. Sometimes I still hate you. Okay. Doesn't that bother you? Less than it used to. She almost smiled. Then she said, I was cruel online. Yes, I didn't tell Megan to hurt you. My body went cold. She did not know what Megan had done in another life. Here. Megan had only harassed me and been stopped. I know. But I liked that people were angry for me. I said nothing. That was wrong. Yes. She looked annoyed. You're terrible at making apologies comfortable. They're not supposed to be comfortable. This time she did smile. We did not hug. We did not become close. We returned to the funeral separately. But something ended beneath those trees. Not the past. The need to keep prosecuting it. Chapter 23. My weekends. The most luxurious thing in my second life was not the promotion. It was Saturday morning. No alarm, no family group assigning tasks, no messages from Mark asking me to compare insurance plans, no Helen asking me to call a clinic because they listen better when you use the right words, no Sophie asking me to edit sponsorship contracts while telling strangers I had failed her. I woke up late, made coffee, watered basil I was slowly killing, and read a novel on my balcony. It sounds small, that was the point. My previous life had been consumed by emergencies, many of them ordinary problems. Wearing emergency clothes, a late bill, a missed form, a landlord dispute, a denied claim, a bad breakup, someone forgot a password, someone needed a ride, someone needed Claire. I had been proud of that. Needed meant loved, needed meant safe, needed meant nobody could leave me the way death had taken my parents. The cost was that I never learned what relationships felt like when I had nothing useful to provide. Rachel taught me without trying. She came over one Saturday with pastries and no crisis. We watched terrible television. She did not ask me to fix anything. When she left, she took her own trash. I nearly laughed at how revolutionary that felt. I built friendships like that, people who made their own appointments, people who asked before assuming, people who could hear no and remain in the room, no romance necessary. My life was not a waiting area for a man who would finally love me correctly. It was already occupied by me. Chapter 24. The last family meeting. Mark requested one final family meeting after he and Helen finalized the divorce. I agreed only because it was at a mediator's office. Sophie came, Helen came. Mark looked older than all of us. The mediator asked what everyone wanted. Mark said, I want my family back. Helen said, I want us to stop hurting each other. Sophie said, I want everyone to stop telling me how I should feel about what happened. Then they looked at me. I said, I want no responsibilities assigned to me without my agreement. Mark flinched. The mediator nodded as if this were perfectly ordinary. Good. That's specific. For once, family expectations became a sentence someone could write down. We made practical agreements, no public discussion of each other's private information without consent, no financial assumptions, no using me as default coordinator for Mark or Helen's medical or legal issues, no contacting my workplace unless there was a true emergency involving me, no asking Sophie to perform reconciliation for an audience. It felt ridiculous. That adults needed rules, then I remembered adults often need contracts precisely because feelings are unreliable. Afterward, Mark stopped me in the hallway. "I am sorry about the restaurant. Why are you apologizing to me?" "Because I blamed you for not saving it." I waited. "You didn't owe me that." The sentence came awkwardly. Maybe that made it more real. "No," I said, "I didn't." He nodded. "I know now." I believed he knew more than before. That was enough. Chapter 25. The appeal. The first time Helen completed an insurance appeal without calling me, she mailed me a copy of the approval letter, not a photograph, a paper copy in an envelope. Across the top she had written, "I did it myself." I laughed when I opened it, then I cried, not because the appeal was complicated. It wasn't. The denied physical therapy sessions had been overturned after Helen submitted the correct clinical documentation and asked the right review question. What mattered was that she had not needed me to do it. For years, dependence had been our family language. I had mistaken helping for closeness, and they had mistaken receiving help for proof that I would always be available. Now Helen's independence felt like a gift to both of us. I texted her, "Good work," she replied. "I wanted to call you 6 times. I smiled, "But you didn't." "No. I was mad at you for 10 minutes. Then I called the insurer again." "That sounds healthy. Don't get smug." I laughed aloud. The change was not dramatic enough for Sophie's channel. Nobody would build a million-view video around a middle-aged woman learning to manage her own paperwork, but I began to understand that real repair often looked boring. Mark changed differently. He stopped using my mother as leverage. The first time he said, "Your mom would be proud of your promotion." I waited for the second half. There was none. "No. So you should help Sophie." "No. So don't forget family." "Just pride." I thanked him, then I sat in my car and cried for my mother until the windshield blurred. I had spent so much energy fighting the family that survived her that I had forgotten grief was still underneath everything. My mother's death had made me afraid of losing family. That fear had made me accept roles nobody should hold forever. Once I understood that, I could forgive myself for taking so long to stop. Forgiveness of myself came before forgiveness of anyone else. Chapter 26. A different emergency, a real family emergency, arrived several years later. Helen collapsed at a grocery store. A stranger called an ambulance. Mark texted me after he learned she was being evaluated. "Mom's at St. Matthew. I'm heading there. Just letting you know." That was all. "No, come now." "No, we need you." "No, your job can wait." I stared at the message, then I looked at my calendar. I had no critical meeting, no reason I could not go, so I went, by choice. That difference changed everything. Helen had fainted from dehydration and a medication issue, not a catastrophic event. She was embarrassed when I entered the room. "I didn't tell him to call you." "I know. You don't have to stay." "I know." She smiled faintly. "You keep saying that. It's useful." I sat beside her for 2 hours. I did not speak to the insurer. I did not demand charts. I did not become case manager. I brought her water after the nurse allowed it, found her glasses in her bag, and listened while she complained about hospital socks. I was a niece, only a niece. It might have been the closest we had ever been. When she was discharged, Mark arrived to drive her home. "Thanks for coming," he said. "Not thanks for handling it." Coming, I drove home afterward with a strange lightness. Boundaries had not made me incapable of love. They had finally made love voluntary. Chapter 27. The fan group. The harassment did not begin with Megan standing near my office. It began in a private fan group Sophie pretended not to manage. A woman from our legal department found screenshots after one of the complaint emails used language too specific to be coincidence. The group was full of edited clips from Sophie's videos, photographs pulled from my old social accounts, and theories about why I had abandoned her. Somebody posted the address of my former apartment, another person listed the hospital group where I worked, a third wrote that if the system refused to punish people like me, communities had to create their own accountability. I stared at that sentence until my stomach hurt. In my first life, nobody had shown me the escalation until Megan was already in the parking garage. This time, I did not minimize it. I met with corporate security, legal counsel, and human resources. We documented the posts, contacted the platform, and created a safety plan that did not require me to disappear from my job. The security director, Carla, asked whether I wanted temporary remote work. "No, you don't need to prove anything." "I'm not. I just don't want them deciding where I can go." She nodded. "Then we make the building safer." That sentence stayed with me, make the building safer, not make Claire smaller. Carla tightened visitor screening, arranged escorts when necessary, and had staff preserve every threatening message. I learned how different protection felt when it was not a favor I would later be required to repay. Sophie eventually posted a disclaimer telling followers not to contact my workplace or approach me in person. It came only after our attorneys contacted her management company. The disclaimer was technically good. It was also carefully written to avoid admitting her content had fueled anything. I have never supported harassment, she said. I only share my truth. I wanted to answer publicly. I wanted to show every screenshot where she had liked comments calling me heartless. I wanted to explain how audiences read permission even when creators never issue direct commands. Instead, I gave the records to counsel and stayed quiet. The platform removed the fan group for coordinated harassment. Sophie called it censorship. The platform called it policy enforcement. Her followers fought among themselves. Some blamed me, some blamed moderators, some finally asked why every conflict around Sophie required an enemy. I watched the audience begin to fracture and felt no need to push. Revenge had once sounded like a dramatic act. Now I understood the cleanest revenge was often refusing to interfere when somebody's own behavior finally met a boundary it could not argue with. Chapter 28. The Family Ledger. A cousin named Paul called after Mark's restaurant closed. Paul was the kind of relative who attended every wedding, remembered every birthday, and somehow knew every family argument without standing in the middle of one. I think people owe you an apology, he said. I laughed. That's a dangerous opening. He told me something I had never known. After my mother died, several relatives had offered to help me financially through college. Mark refused most of it. He said you were independent and didn't want charity. Paul said. I went still. I never knew anyone offered. I figured, my gratitude toward Mark and Helen had always been real. They gave me a room when grief made my dorm unbearable. They fed me. Helen sat with me through nights when I could not sleep, but family mythology had grown larger than the facts. Mark often said, we carried you when nobody else did. Apparently other hands had been reaching too. He had simply been the one who decided I should not see them. Paul sent old emails, an aunt offering to cover textbooks, a cousin offering a summer room, my father's parents asking whether I needed help with tuition. Mark replying that I was taken care of. Something inside me loosened and broke at the same time. At our next mediation session, I brought none of the emails. I did not want a courtroom scene. I only asked Mark one question. Did other relatives offer to help after Mom died? His face changed. Helen looked at him. Mark. He rubbed his hands together. Some people said things. Nobody was serious. Paul was serious. I said. My grandparents were serious. Helen stared at him. You told me Claire didn't want anyone involved. She didn't need it. I leaned forward. That was not your decision. He looked at me sharply. The words echoed the entire story. Not your decision. For once, he heard them from the other side. I thought I was protecting you, he said. From what? Feeling like a charity case. You protected me from knowing I had choices. He had no answer. That night, I rewrote the story I had told myself for years. Mark and Helen had helped me. I was grateful. They had not purchased me. Gratitude could be a fact without becoming a sentence. Chapter 29. Sophie's lawsuit. Sophie eventually filed civil claims connected to the crash. That was reasonable. Serious crashes create serious questions, and courts exist to sort out responsibility. The unreasonable part came when a draft legal narrative suggested that delayed family coordination had worsened her medical outcome. My name appeared in one letter, not as a defendant, as a useful shadow. It described a medically sophisticated relative who was unreachable during the critical early period. My attorney answered with one paragraph. Claire Bennett was not a treating professional, did not undertake responsibility for Sophie's care, and did not delay hospital contact with the patient's parents. Her employment in clinical risk did not give her authority over a private adult relative's treatment. The language disappeared from the filed case. Sophie called me furious. You had your lawyer threaten mine. My lawyer corrected something misleading. It was relevant context. It was useful blame. You really think you're innocent in all of this? I took a breath. I think I'm responsible for my choices. Turning off your phone was a choice. Yes. She paused. She had expected denial. I chose to complete my work. I chose not to insert myself into your medical decisions after your parents were reached. I own those choices, then own what happened. No, those are different things. She laughed bitterly. Convenient. Accurate. Her claims eventually settled among the people and companies actually involved in the crash. I never asked for the amount. Sophie used some of the money to purchase an accessible condo and start a small consulting business helping brands improve accessibility in media campaigns. For a while, She did well, that mattered, her life did not need to be destroyed for mine to improve. The revenge I wanted was never her poverty, it was freedom from being named the cause of everything she disliked. She could succeed, she could fail either way, the result did not belong to me. Chapter 30. The budget meeting, the hospital budget meeting where my advocacy project nearly died taught me another kind of boundary. Senior leadership liked the idea of clearer emergency contact roles, they liked it less when the cost appeared. Training hours cost money, updated software cost money, patient materials required translation, accessibility review, and legal work. One executive suggested we simplify the rollout. I knew what that meant, remove the expensive pieces and preserve the presentation slides. The old Claire would have volunteered extra unpaid work to make the numbers fit, the new one said. Then we reduce the scope, we don't pretend the full program can be delivered without resources. The room went quiet, the executive frowned. Can your team absorb more internally? No, the word had become easier, no flexibility. Not without taking capacity from another safety function, if leadership wants that trade-off, we can document it. Nobody wanted it documented. We received most of the funding. Afterward, Denise laughed in the hallway. You know what your problem used to be, only one. You thought being good meant making impossible requests possible. I stopped walking. She had no idea how accurately she had summarized my family life. And now you're expensive. I laughed. I'll put that on my performance review. The lesson mattered. Boundaries were not only for relatives. Institutions also use reliable people until reliability becomes self-erasure. If nobody names the limit, I became better at my job because I stopped being endlessly accommodating. I could say what a system required, I could say what it could not safely do, I could refuse to hide costs inside personal sacrifice. That was not selfishness, it was risk management. Apparently my entire life had been training for the role. Chapter 31. Helen learns to leave. Helen called one summer because Mark had asked her to co-sign a loan. Even after the divorce, he still believed old family structures should remain available when convenient. What should I do? She asked. I smiled. What do you think you should do? I knew you were going to say that. Then why call? Because I wanted somebody to tell me no. Why? She sighed. Because if I say no myself, I feel mean. I knew that feeling intimately. Then say no while feeling mean. She laughed. That's terrible advice. It's excellent advice. Feelings don't notarize contracts. She declined the loan. Mark was angry for several days, then he found another solution. The world kept turning. Helen called afterward. He solved it. Of course he did. I spent days thinking his life would collapse because I didn't sign. Familiar, very. We sat in silence over the phone. Then she said, I think we taught you this. What? That other people's panic was your responsibility. I looked out my office window. Yes, I'm sorry. I believed her. Not because the apology erased anything, because she had finally changed behavior before asking forgiveness to do the work for her. Chapter 32. Mark's apology. Mark's real apology came without an audience. He asked me to meet him at the corporate cafeteria where he worked. I expected awkward food and an even more awkward conversation. I got both. He served me chicken that was too dry and coffee that tasted burned. You used to criticize my restaurant coffee, he said. This is worse. He laughed. Then his face changed. I was angry at you because you didn't make the decision for us. I looked at him. He continued before courage failed. Not at first. At first I was just scared, but after the surgery started going wrong, I kept thinking you would have known what to do. I didn't know. You would have picked something. Yes, and then I could have blamed you. There it was, no euphemism, no family language, just truth. I set down my fork. Mark rubbed his forehead. I think part of me knew that, maybe not consciously. When you refused, I hated you because there was nowhere to put the fear except on Helen and me. My eyes burned. If I had made a choice you hated, you would have blamed me too, probably. Honest, painful enough. I'm sorry, he said. I nodded. I did not tell him he had already done exactly that in another life. He did not need the impossible truth to understand the real one. We finished the terrible lunch. When I left, Mark hugged me, not tightly, not as if holding me could restore the old family, just once, then he let go. Chapter 33. A quiet award. The Patient Advocacy Project won a national award several years after the crash. The ceremony was smaller than television makes such things look. A hotel ballroom, round tables, name badges, chicken again. Rachel came because she had helped build the original workflows. Denise came because she liked free desserts. When our team was announced, I walked to the stage with 6 other people, not alone. That mattered to me more than the plaque. The presenter summarized our program: clearer emergency contact definitions, better documentation of family communication, stronger transition to patient-directed decisions when capacity returned. I thought of Sophie, Mark, Helen, the old signature with my name on it in another life. Nobody in the ballroom knew any of that. Good, the work had grown beyond the wound that inspired it. Afterward, Rachel held up the plaque. You know where this belongs, office storage. Absolutely not, your mother would haunt you. I smiled. Probably. We placed it in my office. Beside a photograph of my project team, no image of Sophie, no newspaper clipping, no reminder of the feud. My career did not become a monument to my pain, it became proof that I could use what I learned without remaining trapped inside what taught it. Chapter 34. The debt I invented. I found the old grocery notebook while moving boxes from a storage unit. The notebook dated back to the months after my mother died. When I stayed with Mark and Helen, I had written every expense because numbers calmed me when grief did not. Milk, gas, textbooks, bus fare, a contribution toward utilities. After I started part-time work again, I sat on the floor of my condo with the notebook open across my knees and felt something close to embarrassment. For years, I had described those months as the time Mark and Helen saved me. That was true emotionally, financially. The story was less dramatic. They gave me a room, they fed me, they let me exist without pretending grief was neat. That mattered more than money, but I had quietly converted their kindness into a debt no one had ever calculated. Whenever Mark asked for help, I remembered the guest room. Whenever Helen needed an insurance appeal, I remembered the casseroles she made when I could barely eat. Whenever Sophie wanted something, I remembered being 19 and parentless and grateful. I had turned gratitude into a contract with no end date. Nobody stopped me because the contract benefited them. That realization was painful because it removed the comfort of having a single villain. My family had used my sense of obligation, I had also maintained it. Both things were true. I called Paul, the cousin who had shown me the old emails from relatives offering help. Did I really refuse everyone after Mom died? You didn't know most of us offered, right? Why are you asking again? I looked at the notebook. Because I think I built my entire adult personality around paying back a debt nobody actually invoiced. Paul was quiet, then he said, "That sounds like something you'd do." I laughed. "Thank you for the compassion." You want compassion or accuracy? Apparently my family specializes in that question. After the call, I tore no pages out. I did not burn the notebook in a symbolic ceremony. I put it in a drawer. The past did not need destruction, it needed proportion. Mark and Helen had helped me. I loved them for it. I owed them gratitude. Not permanent control over my time, expertise, or conscience. That distinction became one of the quiet foundations of my second life. Chapter 35. Sophie builds something. Sophie surprised everyone by becoming good at accessibility consulting. Not famous good, useful good. She understood cameras, fashion, social media, and the small indignities brands missed when they designed campaigns around disabled people without actually involving them. She knew which sets were impossible to navigate with mobility equipment. She knew when adaptive clothing was designed for a brochure instead of a body. She knew how quickly an audience could tell when a company wanted inspiration instead of honesty. For the first time, her anger produced something besides an enemy. A marketing agency hired her for a project, then another. She built a small client list. The work did not erase her past behavior, it did not make us close, but I watched from far enough away to appreciate the change. Helen sent me an article featuring Sophie, proud of her. She wrote, I replied, "You should be." A week later, Sophie emailed me directly. Subject, not an apology this time. I almost laughed before opening it. She wrote that a client wanted guidance on how hospitals communicated accessibility needs during emergencies. Did I know of any public resources she could read? She did not ask me to review her proposal. She did not ask me to call anyone. She asked for public resources. I sent 3 links and wished her luck. She replied, "Thanks." That was all. The exchange would have looked meaningless to anyone else. To me, it was proof that we could interact without one of us becoming the other's solution. Months later, our hospital hired Sophie's company for a small accessibility review through a procurement process I had nothing to do with. Compliance notified me because of the family connection. I recused myself from selection and evaluation. Sophie delivered the work. The project manager said it was strong. I felt proud. Then I let the feeling remain mine. I did not call Sophie to claim a piece of her success. That was another kind of boundary. Chapter 36. Helen at St. Matthew. A real family emergency arrived several years after Sophie's crash. Helen collapsed in a grocery store. A stranger called an ambulance. Mark texted me after he learned she had been taken to St. Matthew. Helen is being evaluated. I'm heading there. Just letting you know. That was all. No, come now. No, we need you. No, your work can wait. I read the message twice, then I looked at my calendar. Had no critical meeting, no urgent deadline. Nothing I had to abandon, so I went by choice. The difference changed everything. Helen had fainted from dehydration and a medication issue. She was embarrassed more than frightened by the time I arrived. "I didn't tell Mark to call you," she said. "I know, you don't have to stay, I know." She smiled faintly. "You keep saying that, it's useful." I sat beside her. I did not ask to see her chart. I did not speak to the insurer. I did not become case manager because a hospital bracelet existed in the family again. I found her glasses in her bag. I texted Mark which entrance to use. I listened while Helen complained that the hospital's socks were designed by someone who hated feet. I was a niece, only a niece. It might have been the closest we had ever been. When the physician returned, Helen asked her own questions. She wrote down the medication changes herself. She repeated the instructions until she understood them. I said nothing unless she asked me whether she had heard a word correctly. Mark arrived before discharge. He thanked me. For what? For coming, not for handling it. Coming. I had to look away. On the drive home, I cried, not from fear, from relief. Boundaries had not made me incapable of love, they had finally made love voluntary. Chapter 37, The New Family Rule. The family eventually developed a rule nobody wrote down. Ask Claire once. If she says no, solve it another way. The first time I noticed, Mark called about a confusing benefits form from his new employer. "Do you know what this section means?" "Not without reading the whole plan. Can I send it?" I hesitated. Had a busy week. "Not this week. Human resources should be able to explain it." "Okay." That was it. No guilt, no reference to my mother, no family history. 2 days later he texted, "Human resources fixed it." I laughed. The same thing happened with Helen and a landlord problem. Then Sophie, and a tax question connected to her consulting business. I said no. They found accountants, lawyers, advocates, managers, friends. The world was suddenly full of people who could do things Claire once believed only Claire could do. At Thanksgiving, we met at Helen's apartment. Not every year, not as a restored perfect family, just once. Sophie brought dessert, Mark brought too much food from the cafeteria, Paul brought wine. Nobody assigned me a task. I almost became suspicious. Helen noticed. "You look nervous." "Nobody has asked me to fix anything." She smiled. "Give it time." We both laughed. Dinner was ordinary. That was the miracle. Not forgiveness, not punishment. Ordinary. When I left, Sophie walked me to the elevator. "Do you ever think about the day of the crash?" she asked. "Sometimes." "Do you regret turning your phone off?" I considered the question carefully. "No." She nodded, not angrily, just once. "I still wish everything had happened differently." "So do I." The elevator opened. She stepped back. "Good night, Claire." "Good night." The doors closed. For years, I had believed peace required everyone to agree on the past. It didn't. Sometimes peace was simply reaching the point where disagreement no longer demanded a victim. Chapter 38. The question I stopped asking. For most of my previous life, one question followed me everywhere. Did I do the right thing? I asked it while Sophie slept after rehabilitation. I asked it while insurance music played through my phone. I asked it after Helen accused me of choosing the easiest option. I asked it when strangers called me a butcher. I asked it in the hospital where I died. In my second life, I spent years trying not to replace that question with another. Was I right to turn off the phone? The temptation was the same. Find one decision, put the entire moral universe inside it, judge myself forever. Then, during a training session for new risk managers, a young employee asked how I handled cases where every available option had serious consequences. I answered without thinking. Stop looking for the choice that proves you're a good person, look for the choice that belongs to your role, based on the information available, and document why. The room went quiet as people wrote it down. I heard my own sentence only after it left my mouth. That was the answer I had needed across 2 lives. The mistake was not that I once chose amputation. The mistake was believing one painful outcome could determine whether I deserved to be forgiven forever. The second life did not prove the first decision morally perfect. It proved something more useful. There was never a painless answer waiting for the smartest person in the room to discover it. Sophie's parents chose differently. Sophie chose differently. The loss still came. That did not make them evil either. It made them human in a situation no one wanted. What became wrong was the refusal to carry their own grief without turning another person into evidence that the universe had cheated them. Once I understood that, I stopped putting myself on trial. I did not need a verdict. I needed a life. Chapter 39. Off duty. The phrase became a joke among my friends. Off duty. Rachel used it whenever I started reorganizing dinner reservations somebody else had made. Claire, off duty. Paul used it when I tried to explain airport insurance to him during vacation. Off duty, risk manager. Even Helen learned it. She once called about a letter from her pharmacy, heard me inhale the way I did before giving instructions, and interrupted herself. "Never mind, you're off duty. I'll call them tomorrow." I laughed for a full minute. The phrase would have terrified the old Claire. Off-duty sounded unreliable, unloving, unavailable. I had spent years trying to be permanently open. Eventually I learned every good system includes downtime, hospitals rotate staff, emergency lines have teams, servers have backups, people sleep. No safe organization builds itself around one person never being allowed to disconnect. Why had I expected a family to be different? One Friday evening I powered my phone off before attending a small retreat with friends. In the mountains, there was no confidential meeting, no hospital policy, no crisis I knew was coming. I turned it off simply because I wanted 2 quiet days. For a moment, the old fear returned. What if somebody needs me? Then I smiled. They would call someone else, they would wait, they would solve it, they might even be angry. All of those outcomes were survivable. I put the phone in my suitcase and walked outside. The mountain air was cold. Rachel was arguing with Paul about whether the trail map was upside down. Nobody looked at me for the answer. I could have corrected them. I didn't. They figured it out. I laughed all the way up the trail. Chapter 40. Fixed. The last piece of the old family roll disappeared over something embarrassingly ordinary. Mark lost the password to his new employee benefits portal. Years earlier, that problem would have landed in my lap before he even tried the reset link. He would have called from the computer, frustrated, and I would have taken over remotely because listening to him struggle felt slower than solving it myself. This time he sent a message. Do you know how to reset this thing? I replied, use the forgot password link or call the help desk. He sent back, right. Sorry, that was it. An hour later, fixed. I stared at the word and smiled. Fixed, not by me. The next week Helen booked her own travel insurance for a visit to her sister. Sophie hired an accountant for her consulting business. Paul organized a family dinner without asking me to compare restaurants, confirm dietary restrictions, or create a shared spreadsheet. Nobody announced that Claire had been relieved of duty. The family simply learned to function. That should have made me feel less important. Instead, I felt loved in a way usefulness had never given me. People called because they wanted to talk, not because a form stood between them and disaster. Mark sent photographs of a new soup recipe. Helen sent me a picture of a terrible sweater she was considering buying. Sophie once texted me a video of a wheelchair-accessible hotel room with the message, "They actually listened to my recommendations." I replied, "Good work." No one asked for more. One evening I looked through the old family group messages I had saved after Sophie's crash. We saved her leg. We couldn't give up on her. Sophie chose to keep trying. At the time, I had kept them as evidence because I knew blame would come. They had protected me later. But evidence has a strange life. Once the danger passes, proof can become another chain if you keep touching it to remind yourself you were right. I copied the records into a secure archive and removed them from my everyday phone. Not deleted, archived. There was a difference. No longer needed to carry the case in my pocket. The next morning, my phone felt exactly the same weight. I didn't. Chapter 41. The locker key. Months after I archived the family messages, Rachel asked me why I still kept the old locker key from the office where I had turned off my phone on the day of Sophie's crash. Had moved floors twice since then. The locker no longer existed. The key was useless. I turned it over in my hand. Habit, I said. Rachel raised an eyebrow. That's not an answer. She knew me too well. I thought about throwing it away. Instead, I placed it on my desk beside the Patient Advocacy Award, not as a trophy, as perspective. The important thing had never been the physical act of shutting down a phone. Anyone could do that. The important thing was what happened afterward. I returned to my own work. I let other adults remain adults. I allowed people to be angry without treating their anger as an emergency. I stopped confusing access with love and usefulness with worth. Year later, when I cleaned the office before another move, I found the key again. This time I dropped it into the trash without ceremony. Rachel saw me. Finally, it doesn't open anything anymore. She smiled. Maybe that's why you kept it. I looked at the empty space on my desk. Maybe she was right. Some doors matter most when you learn you no longer need the key. Bye. Then I no longer needed every ending to feel victorious. Sometimes the victory was simply that nobody expected me to pick up the phone, sign the form, pay the bill, fix the schedule, or absorb the blame. They could ask, I could answer, I could refuse, and the relationship, if it was real, could survive the word no. That ordinary freedom had once seemed impossible. Now it was the shape of my life. Epilogue. I used to think the most important moment of my second life was turning off my phone. It wasn't. The important moment came later. When I turned it back on, there were dozens of missed calls. The hospital, my uncle, my aunt, relatives who believed urgency created entitlement. I could have driven straight to St. Matthew. I could have read every report. I could have become the person in the middle again. Instead, I sent one message, follow the medical team's recommendations, then I went home. That choice did not save Sophie from pain, it did not save Mark's business, it did not save his marriage to Helen, it did not transform Sophie into a grateful, wise person overnight. It did something smaller and more important, it saved my life from becoming their consequence. Years later, my phone still rings, hospitals call because of work, Helen calls sometimes to tell me family news, Mark sends me photographs of meals he cooks at the corporate cafeteria he now manages, Sophie sends a birthday message most years. Sometimes I answer immediately, sometimes I call back later, sometimes I do not answer at all. Nothing collapses, the world keeps moving. That was the discovery I needed 2 lives to make. I was never the only person who could solve everything, I was simply the person who had always volunteered first. Once I stopped, doctors kept treating patients, parents made decisions, adults learned to read their own forms, insurance companies spoke to people who were not me, families survived frustration, and I finally had enough quiet to hear my own life. On the anniversary of the compliance review I once abandoned, our hospital network announced another expansion of the patient advocacy program I helped build. Rachel brought cake into my office. For your weird work anniversary, this is not a thing, it is now. We ate cake with plastic forks while rain moved across the windows. My phone vibrated on the desk, unknown number, hospital prefix. I looked at it, Rachel raised an eyebrow. You getting that? I smiled. In a minute. And for once, a minute belonged entirely to me. After hearing the story above, what are your thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. Looking forward to hearing from you. If you liked this story, don't forget to like it, share it, and subscribe to my channel. See you next time.